Oh.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Self Pub Sunday. Today we're joined by JCM Berne. Joe is here to talk about Wistful Ascending and the Hybrid Helix series. So Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 3 published right now, and you're working on book 4 currently?
Yep.
Okay.
Book 4, I'm at like the final 3 or so chapters of the rough draft.
Awesome.
So hopefully, and I just got a sketch of the cover. I'm very excited.
Awesome.
My cover artist, and hopefully that will come out something like August, September.
Nice.
I don't know. I should be better planned, but I'm not. So,
Sometime
I'm
this
sorry.
year.
I'm sorry. I don't have like a date 6 months in advance. It's going to be ready, and then I'm not going to really want to wait. So once it's ready, I'm at most going to give it a few weeks, and I'll put it out there.
Awesome.
So August, September, something like that.
So that gives me a little bit of time to catch up.
Yes. You have to read Return of the Griffin and Blood Reunion, so you understand what's going on. You don't have to do anything.
So I thought while folks...
Tequila. Just in case anyone was afraid that I would be sober for an afternoon a live stream, no, I have a glass of Terramana Añejo, if anyone's curious.
Nice.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just for a bit of an icebreaker while folks trickle in. Hopefully they trickle in. We'll see. I don't know.
Stacy?
We've got Stacy's from Finland here. So
I'm going
Joe is from New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in upstate New York. To me, the two things that stand out to my mind when you talk about New York is the pizza and the bagels. And so my icebreaker question for you, Joe, if you were on a stranded island and you could only have either New York pizza or New York bagels for your time on that island, what would you choose?
Ooh, that's rough. Okay, so if we're talking about plain bagels versus like plain pizza, I would choose the pizza because think with the cheese and the tomato sauce, you got more food groups covered. And I think plain bagels would get on my nerves after a while. If I could include a topping of my choice, like a schmear, I'd probably have to go like bagels and white for salad or a lox spread or bagels and lox, something like that. That would, because I probably like that more.
Okay.
Slightly. But man, a good New York bagel and a white fish salad or like cream cheese and lox. Oh, that's so good. So yeah, so for nutritional purposes, if it had to be plain, I'd go with pizza.
Okay.
I feel like you could survive longer on one thing if I had to. That's a good
question.
question.
Get your fruits in there with the tomato sauce.
Oh, right? That's it. They're tomatoes are fruit, right? I don't know.
I mean, they'll always be vegetables to me.
Yes.
But people like to correct me and remind me that they're fruits now.
It's one of those
things.
things.
Just like Pluto. Pluto will always be a planet to me.
Okay. Yeah, I have thoughts about words and meanings and all that, but we don't have to get into that too far.
Okay. Yeah. For me, I would say also pizza because it's harder to replicate true New York pizza than it is New York bagels.
I'll buy that. Are you from far enough west to be in like Loganberry and Wet Country, or are you not that far?
No, I'm in if you look at the map of New York State, I grew up right outside Binghamton, which is like literally in the middle, right above the Pennsylvania border.
I mean, I went to college at Buffalo.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I've been through the state like hundreds of times, so I know more than the city. People can grow up in the city and not understand that there's a whole state out there and it's quite large.
Yeah.
Because you can be very isolated from that. But
it's
I'm not.
Very big state.
More recently in life, I've branched out. I've been up all over. I'm a big fan of New York State, actually.
It's a great state.
I like like the Finger Lakes region. I love that stuff.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
So I thought we would start by talking a little bit about your writing career and your inspirations, so folks can get to know Joe, JCM Berne, the author, before we talk about your book as a whole. So, Joe, have you always wanted to be a writer, or is this a later passion?
So I fell in love with stories at a young age, and I kind of always wanted to be a writer. I remember distinctly wanting to like write my own comic books, and I didn't have the artistic talent for that. And breaking into comics as a writer, but I always had the sense of becoming a writer was sort of like like the kid who likes musical theater maybe or likes acting in like their middle school play and they want to be an actor, but they look at Hollywood and they kind of know my chances of being like the next Robert Downey Jr. are actually really low, so they kind of feel like it's that sort of a goal and they kind of give up, which most people in the 8th grade who like to act do give up. They don't try to go to Hollywood, and I was exactly like that, right? It's exactly the same thing. If I thought if I had had whatever it takes to be in the like a middle schooler thinking I could be a professional, I could be the next Michael Moorcock or whatever, or Piers Anthony. Whatever. Piers Anthony's a terrible example. He's awful, but but I liked him at the time because I was 10 or whatever. But if I thought I could have been a successful writer, I would have. And if I thought that pursuing writing, so there are some like careers where you may never reach the pinnacle, but along the way, there's plenty of like places where you can support yourself and be very comfortable. Like I work in computer science, right, for the financial industry. There are people who make 10 times my salary, but you don't have to be at that pinnacle to have a comfortable living. I make a very comfortable living, right? So like there's like you don't have to get to the top, but like acting is one of those places where you're kind of at the top or you're not or you're like poor, right? And I feel like writing was very sort of similar. Maybe I just didn't know. I don't know if that was true or if that was just my impression, but I kind of felt like I could either make it or I would just not be able to pay my rent. So I went into something else. But I loved to read from a young, like I was reading my number one hobby when I was like ninth, 10th grade, no, not ninth, from when I was 9 or 10 years old, like third grade, was like reading genre fiction. And that never stopped. I got more into, this is also an age where you couldn't watch like movies or, you couldn't, your hobby couldn't be watching Kung Fu movies because there weren't any. Hey, black and blue collar reader. Nice. Sir Joseph. It's my nickname from only from him, which is fine. Sir Joseph Lightbringer. I like that. So if I thought I could be a writer, I would have been. And then certainly I really tried when I was in my late 20s. I wrote a novel and I thought I could get it published. I didn't really understand what the process would entail. So I wrote the book, I sent it to Tor, they said no, and I kind of gave up. I kind of didn't really know what to do at that point, like what the next step was. Now I do. Like I could go back in time and talk to that, 27-year-old me. I would have been like, now do X, Y, and Z. And I had the resources I could have. I didn't like, I needed to, polish. I needed to take some writing classes, the local community college, something. I needed to get an editor. I needed to do all those things. I just didn't know. So I didn't. So I kind of gave up. And then I wrote another book like 8 years later, and same thing, IBO. Self-publishing wasn't an option at those times. That was when to self-publish, you really had to go and like fund a print run. You'd buy a bunch of books, you'd stick them in your car and sell them out of your trunk. You'd hand sell them out of your trunk at like conventions. People did that, right? That was a thing.
Yeah.
I never had the fortitude or I never felt like I deserved to invest the money to try that. I don't know if it would have worked anyway. So I never did. And then, then in 2020, I convinced myself to write a book and just publish it on Amazon no matter what. Even if it sucked. That was my motto. I should have had it written on my monitor, even if it sucked. Right? Because like every day you get there and I knew I wanted to finish a book because I hadn't finished a book in like 15 years or close to it. And I was like, okay, how am I going to finish it? Like, what's my motivational trick? And mine was, even if it sucks, right? I'm just going to plow ahead, write the next chapter, even if it sucks. So that was my motto for all of Wistful Ascending. So I did. And then I finished it and I'm like, it's great. And I read it once to find typos and I put it on it.
Never good.
Yeah. And then it was terrible. Well, it wasn't terrible. It was good enough that I got enough positive feedback that people wanted me. They saw some, because the book was fundamentally the same as the book you read. It was almost the exact same story. It was just much more poorly written. There's a lot of stuff I just didn't know. Like a passive voice. I had no idea, right? Echoes. I wasn't catching echoes. All these things that you don't, and I have a whole theory about why you don't notice that. When you're reading it, you're recollecting in your mind the cool stuff you imagined when you wrote it.
Oh yeah.
Right? You're not really reconstructing your mind what the words say from scratch. Right? So because the cool image you had in your head, you're like, oh yeah, that thing is cool. So you read the word, even the words don't actually like describe that well, you still feel that. So this is great. This is because you have this cool image in your head.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and it took me a long time to break through that.
Yeah.
So that's my writing career. My inspirations are all. I've said this before, and I don't know if it sounds funny or if it sounds obnoxious, but my inspirations are always mistakes. It's always things that bug me. So I'll have some property that I love. I'll read. I'm like, this is so cool, and then I'm like, why doesn't Superman destroy all the nukes? Or something. Something will bother me. Some like um, some missing aspect. Someone will have a special power that they don't use. Something won't be balanced right. Like why is this person able to like unite all the clans for this great war? Why couldn't anyone else do that for the last 2,000 years? So many books will have these moments, and there was a very particular one in Invincible that I can't tell anyone because it happens like in a later volume. The cartoon hasn't caught up anywhere close to that, so I don't want to spoil it for people. But there was one particular thing. I was like, someone did something that got them a lot of personal power. And I'm like, how is it that no one's thought of doing this thing in the last, 10,000 years that the empire has been there? How could this one person have been the first person to think of this when all these, it doesn't make sense. And it bugged me so much. I wrote a whole series to like answer the question.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's always something that bugs me. But it's something, it has to be something where I love most of it, but there's something in it that bugs me. Like the economy doesn't quite make sense. The motivate, like you read I don't know if you ever read the Dresden Files series, the Robert Salvatore. It's the Drow, the Dark Elves, and the Underworld, and they live like 1,000 years, and they have like very few children, and they kill each other like flies. And I'm like, how it doesn't make any sense. You can't have this long-lived, like very like low, slow-growing population, and they're just dying in droves. There'd be none left. It doesn't like it's stuff like that that really bugs me. So I tried to make a setting where that wouldn't happen. None of that stuff. All the stuff that bugs, none of the things that bug me are in there. That was my primary goal, which sounds like I could have just not written anything and accomplished that. But,
well, we're glad that you didn't.
Thank you.
At least I am. I can't speak for the people in the chat. By the way, anyone in the chat, if you have questions for Joe, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them as we move along here.
I can see that.
I always forget to say that. So, do you have any, I like to call them writing heroes or writers that you aspire to write like or be like or inspired your writing?
When I think about this, it's funny because I'll come up with like stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been inspired by so many people that it's really hard to pin it down. I don't think I'm exactly like any of them. I feel like in a very loose way, I feel a kinship with Jim Butcher. I like his structure in that. First of all, he's got like the tone that I think I'm close-ish to his tone, right?
Yeah.
A lot of humor, some serious situations primarily, and I don't think I'm as dark as he gets, but maybe I am in some places. I don't know. I'm not quite as willing to isolate my main character as he is. There's differences, but I like the structure in that he releases these standalones in a series, like the Dresden Files. Right, all the books are standalones, but they all tie together into one giant story. I really like that as a reader, so I like that so that's what I'm trying to write. So structurally, it's very similar. So I think of that. I don't really think of myself as writing like dialogue. I don't hear anyone else's voice other than my own in my head when I write stuff. So like writing, actually like sentence structure, I don't deliberately think of anyone. But it could be that I'm totally ripping someone off and I just haven't figured it out. And there's a ton of writers and stuff that I love. Like I was talking about Robert Kirkman, who did Invincible. He did The Walking Dead. I'm not a big fan of zombie stuff, but Invincible I really liked. Jim Starlin did a lot of comics from back in the day. I like that stuff, that tone, the space, big ships. He created like Warlock. He created Thanos, I think. He wrote that kind of stuff. There's a ton. I mean, I'm an old man, so there's a lot of influences. I like Steve Perry a lot. He wrote a bunch of martial arts space opera. Kind of a pulp writer. Really like it. None of it's like great literature, but it was fun for me as a kid. I like the martial arts stuff. And there's manhwa and manga that influenced me a ton. There's a manhwa called Tower of God. I don't even know the creator's name. I think they go by a pseudonym. I can't remember it. But I thought that was fantastic. I totally steal elements from there that you'll see in later books. None of it's appeared yet, but I stole it. There's a ton more. I don't really think that way. I don't really think like who I'm getting these things from. But then sometimes like, someone will be like I remember who was it? Tori Victoria Tekken, who
Mhm.
author of Phased, who does has her own channel. She was talking about something about Rurouni Kenshin, and all of a sudden I stood up. I'm like, oh yeah, there's like a ton of like Rurouni Kenshin in Rohan. I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't deliberately sat down and said, what can I take from Rurouni Kenshin and put in here? But like
Right.
it's this character who was like in a war and he was like an assassin and he was like feared and now he's retired and he's like trying to live a quiet life and not draw his sword and not kill anybody. He's like very committed to that. But of course his past comes back. And I'm like, this is almost the same story. It's not, not almost, but it's so similar. And I did not occur to me once while writing Wistful Ascending. But I mean, I totally read Rurouni Kenshin and loved it. So like, clearly
Yeah.
that's where the ideas came from, but I didn't notice until I don't think, yeah, because I don't remember exactly the order of things, but I definitely, she mentioned it somewhere and I'm like, oh yeah, oh, huh, it's funny.
It's funny because when I was writing my MFA thesis, which was nonfiction based, I used a book that a professor in my program had written as kind of the structural plot to go along with it. And there were different phrases and sentences that as I was editing it and getting ready to like defend, I would come across and I was like terrified that I accidentally plagiarized those sentences because they just sounded too good. I'm like, I
Right.
cannot have come up with that on my own because that sounded way too good. And I'd have to like go and scramble and look at the book and make sure like I didn't actually like accidentally steal, because there were some like sentences where like I took the sentence and I took out like her character names and like put my character names in there because they were just like said everything I wanted to say in that sentence.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my, but there were some sentences where I'm like, I could not have come up with that on my own.
That's probably on somewhat level why people don't want to read anything too close to what they're writing while they're writing it.
Yeah.
Because there's always that fear that you're going to subconsciously steal something like that. And I have not noticed myself doing that with any like senses. Um, uh, I'm sure it happens. Except one or two I do deliberately. There's a joke in Blood Reunion that I totally stole from a comic called The Badger. And as soon as some people read Blood Reunion, I can tell them the joke and where I stole it from. But I, once in a one here or there, and it's an obscure enough reference that I'm like,
Right.
no one's gonna read it. No one read The Badger. It was a very small, independent comic that came out, 30 years ago. Nothing. Oh yeah, it might have been 30. Oh geez, I feel old now. I said 30 like as a joke, and I'm like, oh, it actually was 30. Okay.
It's also funny that you mentioned Jim Butcher and the Dresden Files because as I was making my way through Wistful Ascending, I was talking to Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative, giving her all of my updates, and at one point she was like, Joe must be a Dresden fan because there's so many similarities between the Hybrid Helix series and the Dresden Files series, which Leslie is a huge fan of Dresden. She's read those books at least more than once. I don't know how many times she's read them. I'm just in the Dresden Files for the first time this year.
I mean, I keep saying I'm an old man. I mean, I read those as they came out, and usually
Right.
I'm the type of person who, if the fifth one came out, I read 1 through 4 again. I had them all on my shelves. I had the hardbacks somewhere. The compilations from the Science Fiction Book Club, where they would put like 3 paperbacks in one fat hardcover.
Yes.
I had all those. So I'm a huge fan. But that structure is not unique to Dresden. I'm trying to think of other examples of series like that. I mean, it's pretty common in urban fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Like and I don't know who started it, but a lot of the urban fantasy, like the stuff that is urban fantasy that more of it's become paranormal romance as the romance side of it became more popular. But if you look at like really early Laurel Hamilton, it wasn't quite paranormal romance for like the first 3 books, and then it really became paranormal romance later. And there's a lot of other authors straddling that, like Patricia Briggs and stuff. And this structure is common. The Vlad Taltosh, Stephen Brust. It's a fantasy series. That's a little different in that they're not published in chronological order. So they're very disordered. So a later book can often be but they're very specific in times. Every book stuff happens. It's a different part of the character's history, but they're not one after the other.
Right.
But they're absolutely one character, his friends, the stuff they go through, changes, different relationships. There's progression. There's not one. It's not like Conan where the character is basically the same in every story.
Right.
And Stephen Brust has been doing that, long before Jim Butcher. Glenn Cook did it with the Adjective Middle Noun series. P.I. Garrett, where all the books are like quiet iron, particles or something. It's adjective, a metal, and then a noun. All the titles.
Okay.
It's like a fantasy detective series. So in that sense, the structures, it's very popular, but Dresden Files are prime example. Lots of people have done it, and I've always loved it.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the humor, I don't know if I necessarily tried to copy Jim Butcher, but that's just, I don't think, however it happened, that's me. I can't write any other way. I've tried, and I literally can't. I have like one voice.
I felt like Rohan was Dresden, but in superhero format. Maybe not quite as dark as Dresden gets at times, but like it very similar.
But but I try to take away the parts of Dresden, the parts of Harry Dresden that annoyed me. Because that's the theme, right? It's what annoys me. I try not to do that. So like when he's like, I don't want to trust my friends, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing that. I'm not taking that. And it's also a little more of the guy who's gotten to the peak of power and then retired, whereas Dresden's really not. Dresden's much more of he starts out tough, but not as tough as he gets later. Yeah. You haven't read that much.
No, I've read 2 short stories, a graphic novel, and book 1. Okay,
it's a slow progression.
Yeah,
it's not quite Dragon Ball Z power up every book,
right.
But he's definitely like on the weaker side. In the books you've read, still tough, but he gets much. I'm not really giving anything away. He gets tougher later.
Yeah, I'm loving it so far. So
Good.
I was stuck in like the classical world for a really long time. Like I was that weird kid in like middle school who was obsessed with like Emily Dickinson and Edgar Allan Poe, and like Dracula was my first like fictional crush. And so I was stuck in that world while everyone else was reading this like amazing fantasy as it was coming out. I was like stuck in the Edgar Allan Poe, Emily Dickinson. Like my parents were like, "Why are you always like this?" I'm like,
"No, you love what you love. You don't have to apologize for it."
Right. And then as I got further in school, I had more classics introduced to me because at that time we didn't have cool classes where you could read fantasy books.
Neither did I.
Like they do now.
Yeah.
And then I went and got my bachelor's degree in English, so I read more different classics, but more classics. And then I got my master's degree in nonfiction writing, so then I got stuck in the nonfiction world. And then I discovered BookTube a couple years ago, and now I'm trying to catch up on all of the fantasy that everyone's grown up with. Like this year I am in the middle of the Wheel of Time series, Song of Ice and Fire series, and Dresden all for the first time.
Well, I would definitely continue with one of those 3.
I'm enjoying all of them.
Good. You have more tolerance for some of that than I do. I don't have tolerance for Song of Ice and Fire. Wheel of Time, I read them all when they came out, and then like when 4 came out, I reread 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then I said I can't keep doing this. I can't reread 1 through 5 when 5 comes out.
Those are big books to reread.
So I said I'm not going to reread these until they were done. Till the series is done, I'm going to read the whole thing straight through. And then the whole thing finally was released. I bought the whole thing on ebook, and I reread 1 and 2, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. I just it's too much time. It's too much time. Yeah, no, I would skip both those and read Malazan, but that's me.
Malazan I have scheduled for 2025. Next year will be my year of Hob. 2025 is my year of Malazan.
Yeah, A Song of Ice and Fire, Hob, too dark for me. Like, what do I have one line about A Song of Ice and Fire that I'll always say. It's like George R. R. Martin. It's like he was trying to tell me something. He was trying to say, look, Joe, I can write characters that you love and care about, and then kill them ruthlessly. I feel like
Sure.
George, like real life can already do that to me. I don't need this in my fantasy novels. Like, go away. So
I always
the third book,
get
I just quit.
concerned when I start liking a character.
I don't want to like a character and have him die. I just don't.
Because I'm just like,
Nope.
I have a feeling this character is gonna die at some point. Now I have a hands up with A Song of Ice and Fire series because I watched the TV show as it came out.
You're gonna know a lot, I guess.
So, I kind of know. I mean, it's been years since I've watched it, since it ended. I don't remember when it ended.
I wouldn't watch it.
So it's been years, so I remember things completely different. And I've been doing reading vlogs for each of the books and trying to say I don't remember this moment happening. I don't remember this happening to this person. People are like, yeah, it did. I'm like, oh, okay.
I DNF'd after book 3, and then I wouldn't watch the show. Like, why won't you watch the show? I'm like, people die. People I like. I don't need that. I don't need that. Not going to happen. But I'm a wimp. That's the fun of it. You got to figure out who you are. I mean, I get why people like it. Like, it's nice to be surprised. Yeah. People don't like the feeling of, oh, I like this person, so I know they're going to be safe. People don't, people object to that. It takes them out.
There is very little plot armor.
Suspension of disbelief, right? People like their suspension of disbelief. It's like if the character survives impossible odds too many times, so that they can't stay immersed in the story. I get that. I get that it's hard for a lot of people to read more positive stuff, especially if they think the world's a grim place, which I wouldn't argue against, right? But I'm just like, I don't want it. I want a story where I know that the good guys will win and the costs won't be too crazy. Maybe someone will lose some money. The puppy might get lost, but they'll find it. They'll be sad. They'll find the puppy. So right. I don't know.
So speaking of lighter, happier things, let's talk spoiler free about Wistful Ascending.
Yes, we should do that first. I agree.
For people out there who haven't read Wistful Ascending yet, first of all, shame on you because you definitely need to. It's such a good time, and don't trust the Kindle when it tells you the book is complete. Now, I'll get to that story in a minute when we go into spoilers, so I can talk about exactly where Kindle told me the book was ending.
I'm very curious.
But just don't trust the Kindle when it says the book has ended. So, spoiler free, Wistful Ascending. I'd love to talk about the rest of this series, but I haven't read it yet, so it would be a one-sided conversation. Can you give us your elevator pitch for Wistful Ascending?
I hate these. My biggest problem with
Wistful Ascending. It's a long elevator ride.
I don't think it pitches well.
Okay.
And you read another book of mine, Partial Function, which I partially wrote. So starting with the pitch, thinking I'm going to write a book with a good pitch. And I did not do that with Wistful Ascending. So Wistful is your next. Nice.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy it. So Wistful Ascending is a story of Rohan, who is a living weapon of mass destruction, who after 10 years fighting in wars has retired and is trying to live a quiet life, and finds out that while he is trying to forget his past won't forget him. That's the best I can do. So basically, it's this class. It's this, he's a high-powered superhero character, right? Like if you watch like Marvel movies, he's not the Falcon. He's Thor. Okay, so he's a Thor level in terms of his abilities, and he's clearly had a lot of sort of dark-ish past because he's half alien, and so basically it's this empire of aliens, and their children their mixed race children, for reasons that are explained at the end. It's a spoiler. Have enormous power. So basically, they go around, they start little families on planets in hiding in secret. And their kids have superpowers, and they raise them in very manipulative, obnoxious ways. So their kids, to please mom, to please daddy, will then go off and fight in like wars for them as like living soldiers, living weapons. And the Ildrak themselves are not that tough. So I like the setup. I think it's kind of funny, and it's not. I don't want to say it's unique, but it's not super common. I don't think I've seen it anywhere else exactly like this. So he had a manipulative upbringing, and he's, a lot of, issues related to that. His powers itself is kind of dangerous. When he draws in too much power, it brings with it a lot of anger. So it's that classic, the Hulk, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. But when he does get angry, he gets very, very tough. And he's trying to solve problems without just punching them in the face. And I like the character who's trying to solve problems without punching in the face, but is also really good at punching things in the face. Right? That's like my favorite kind of hero. It's like, I'm going to really try my best to not just punch things to solve all my problems, but if I have to, I'm going to be really good at it. It's like, speak softly, carry a big stick. That whole, not to get political about stuff that happened 100 years ago, but that general stuff. So, so that's the story. So there's probably it's not a comedic novel. I feel like I need to tell people that. People sometimes expect it to be like a laugh a minute or like a silly slapstick plot line, which it really isn't. None of the relationships are really meant to be funny. Some of the
it has funny moments, but
I think it has funny moments. I think Rohan is very quippy, like Peter Parker, like a Spider-Man thing. He jokes. So he jokes when he's stressed, which is all the time because he's in a book. So he jokes around a lot, and some people find that fun. I mean, I'm sure some people don't think it's fun. But generally people who really like the books generally think it's funny, but it's not a comedy in the sense of like super silly things happening. So I like to distinguish that, right? It's like Dresden, right? Dresden says a lot of funny things, but the books aren't comedies. They're not meant to be silly, and the characters aren't silly. The relationships aren't silly. The relationship is serious. Some of them say funny things. So it's more like that. And again, Dresden keeps coming up because many of the tonal aspects do match. They do align between me and Dresden. So, thank you. Mine too. Yeah.
So
I really tried to come up with a character people would empathize with, and also one that resonated with me. Because it doesn't resonate with me, I can't write the book. I've tried. I keep saying this because I have, like most authors, I have, a hard drive full of failed writing projects.
Yeah.
So, I like Rohan because I'm at an age where I often look back on my life and think, I did some things, I was mean to people I shouldn't have been mean. I said some jokes I shouldn't have. I feel a lot of like regrets, and it's all about living with, a lot of its storyline is about living with those feelings. Of course, Rohan is regretting, mass murder, and I'm regretting teasing someone when I was 10. It's not the same level, but it's some of the same ideas.
Yes. So you kind of hinted at this, spoke about this in your elevator pitch. That was like the elevator going up to like the Empire State Building. It's okay. It's a long elevator ride. We didn't specify how long it was. And so feel free to say pass if you don't have anything further to add. But what makes Wistful Ascending different than other science fiction fantasy books of its kind?
I am really interested in knowing the answer to that. I feel like very few people tell me the comps that resonate with me. I think it's a little bit like there are other superhero books being written, and superhero books are unique because you've got this very like uniquely powerful protagonist. Whereas in most science fiction, the guy piloting the spaceship, anyone could pilot the spaceship and be maybe fractionally worse, but not much worse, right? The spaceship might be special, but the pilot's more or less interchangeable. So superheroes don't have that, right? Superman is really actually stronger than everybody else. So it has that, but I feel like most superhero stories that I've come across, they run the gamut from they're either written for kids or they're written to be comedies. They're silly on purpose, or they're deconstructions. They're trying to say we're superheroes, but we're not really. So like Wild Cards, we're superheroes, but we're more realistic. So the superheroes are going to be they're going to be better more Watchmen, right? The superheroes are going to be degenerates, right? The Boys, same thing. The superheroes they're not going to be heroes in the class. They're not going to meet all the criteria of classic superhero stories. And what I said is I'm going to write a classic superhero story, but for grown-ups. So the characters are going to be more mature, they're going to be more realistic, but they're actually going to be like heroic in the sense of trying to do the right thing, really trying to be good people, and for the most part succeeding. That all goes together for me as what a real superhero story used to be originally, like the classics. So it's one of those, but it's neither written for kids because it's really not. I think a teenager could enjoy it, but that wasn't my target. Like if you look at the romance in here, it's not written so a 15-year-old can appreciate it. They're going to get it. I think the people who appreciate the romance in this story are, for the most part, they're probably north of 30 or 40, something like that. So so there's that. I think there's some good action in there. How is it different? I don't know. I don't read a ton of the superhero novels out there. I've read a few, and I need to read more. But I have read relatively few books in the last 10 years for a variety of reasons, mostly having to do with time.
Right.
But most of the books I've read were older than that. So I'm not and there really weren't superhero books being written 10 years ago. Yeah. With indie publishing, that's much more common now, but it didn't exist. So in a sense, I'm feeling a void that exists in my own mind. And but so far I haven't had people come and like leave reviews and say this is just like this other set of superhero novels that are being published by some other indie author. I don't really know why they're not. Like I'm not getting comps like that, but I'm not. People say it's like
you've also got Space Bears.
I'm sorry?
You've also got the Space Bears.
I've got the Space Bears. I've got a pretty thoroughly thought out like backstory. If you get through Blood Reunion, you'll realize there's a lot of backstory. I've got a magic system that's really consistent. It's all based on like one or two basic principles, and everything derives from that. I don't know if you can tell from reading, but I think it has an effect on the storyline and the way things feel balanced. That it's going to that you as a reader, people as readers might not realize that that's what they like about it, but there's a sense when powers are balanced. It really bugs me in a superhero story when someone has some kind of magical ability that they should be able to like beat everybody else, but they don't think to use it. Or you say, why doesn't someone have this power or this power, and there's no real explanation. So this is a little more, I don't know. So I like to think it's different in those ways, but I kind of also on one level, I feel like figuring that out is not my skill set. I write the books, and it's up to someone else to tell me what the pitch should be or whether or not they think it's different than other stuff or what's unique about it. Because my job is just to tell the story. I don't know if I can tell you why it's different from another story.
Okay.
That's my cop out.
So my next question, you kind of addressed briefly when you were talking about your inspirations, but where did the idea for Wistful Ascending come from?
So there's a lot of pieces to it, right? There's a lot of pieces to it. Rohan is very similar to other characters we mentioned. The Ildrach and the way that the whole thing about their kids, that comes from a very specific thing that happens in a later volume of Invincible. But it's this whole idea that, when you've got this, like, because it's not that uncommon in like comics to have like a species with like amazing powers. Like Superman's a Kryptonian. He's not even supposed to be that particularly special as Kryptonians go. But then you're always like, well, why did Kryptonians stay on Krypton? Why didn't they just conquer all these other planets with yellow suns if they have all these amazing powers? And then like if he has a kid and the kid has the same powers, then are there any Kryptonians out there like raising armies of mini Superman, like breeding with a very fertile local population? And like, like why isn't that happening? So that's how that whole thing came from. And then there's other stuff where I wish I remembered where some of it came from. Like this, the bears. I remembered like a very shock looking bear in a manga I read like 30 years ago, and I thought that was a really funny image and always stuck in my head. I think it was Outlanders. So I made like shock looking space bears because they're like sitting in their spaceship, and in an early chapter, Rohan comes flying and he's like knocking on the window, And they're like, how is this guy just flying around in space? Because they don't come from a place where people have superpowers, and they're just like, and the idea of a bear, which is like its mouth open, its eyes bugging out, like drool hanging down. I always thought that was hilarious. So that's the whole thing. That's where the bears came from.
I love it.
Yeah. And then the artificial intelligence spaceships, that comes from the magic system. They have to be. Otherwise, if you postulate a world where there's lots of people with like a little bit of telekinesis, you can't have spaceships or airplanes or anything and be safe. Right. So like anyone with like a little bit of telekinesis can just like mess up the wiring on your airplane and it crashes. Right. So
yeah.
So unless they have some kind of way to prevent that. So that's always been a thing. And this is a kind of magic system I've been working on for, I'm not even exaggerating, over 30 years in variations. So.
Yeah. So go back to when you very first started working on the first ever draft of Wistful Ascending. Did the story or the characters come first to you? Or both?
The characters. Probably Rohan and Wei Li came to me first. I probably didn't think of any kind of personality for Wistful until later. But the rough idea of who Rohan was and like what his past was, that was definitely first. Well, the setting came even before that, but this idea of a superhero like from Earth, and I don't know why I took him off Earth. Now I'm trying to remember. I have no idea. This is like 4 years ago. I drink a lot. I don't know. Yeah, the characters came first. Okay. And it always does. Like with every book, the first thought I have is like an overarch, a very loose. Like Return of the Griffin was just giant sharks invade Earth. Like that was the whole thought. And then everything just came from there. It's like, how do I flesh that out? Because that's not going to make like 120,000 words. And it ended up, turning into 120,000 words.
So now I want to slide into some spoiler chat. So for those out there like Dan, who hasn't read Wistful Ascending yet, if you don't want to be spoiled, go read the book and then come back and watch the rest of this show. Because we're going to be talking about nitty-gritty stuff that happens. The end will be completely spoiled. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this book, thank you for joining us, and come back after you finished Wistful Ascending.
There you go.
So I'll start off our spoiler chat by telling my Kindle story. So Joe knows part of this because I was sending him crazy messages late at night the other day. I was reading Wistful Ascending on my Kindle. I had the audiobook ready. Most of the time reading this book, I was doing an immersion read where I was listening to the audiobook while I was following along with the Kindle. And the Kindle said I had like 20 minutes left in the book, and it was late at night. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just knock this off before I go to sleep. So I'm reading it and I'm loving what I'm reading. And then the Kindle says book complete. And it's telling me that the book ends where the other hybrids come and essentially put Rohan in the stone, and they're like beating him up and taunting him and stuff. And I'm like freaking out. I sent Joe a message. I'm like, Joe, how could you end it like this? This is nuts. My TBR cannot handle this. And then I was like talking to Leslie at the same time, and I could tell by her responses that I was missing something. She was like, yeah, the ending is great. And I'm like, usually she goes into a lot more detail, so I'm missing something. So then I went and pulled up the Audible audiobook, and I got it to where I was at, and there was still like 5 chapters left. It's like the Kindle told me book complete, but it also told me I was only 95% through the book. I thought the last 5% was like, a sneak peek to book 2, maybe an interview with Joe, all of that extra stuff that we tend to get at the end of some books, a list of characters or whatever. And I'm like, I can't believe he just left it like that. And then I started the audiobook back up, and I'm like, okay, Now this makes more sense. And it was actually that like last 5% of the book that bumped it up from a 4.5 star to a full 5-star rating for me. Because
Yeah.
it, Joe was like, what are you talking about? There was no cliffhangers in my book at all. It wrapped up very nicely, I thought. And I'm like,
Yeah, I don't like cliffhangers. It's funny. I was just looking on Twitter. Another author was talking about how she loves cliffhangers, and if this book just ends, she won't read the next one. She likes the tension of like waiting, and I'm like, I'm the opposite. So that's what I write. I'll never have. Hopefully, if you read Wistful Ascending, hopefully if you get to the end, you're like, oh, I have questions still, but you don't feel like the book didn't end. Like there's a mix there, right? You have to have. Some stuff you're like, I'd be curious to know more about this thing, or you have a sense that clearly more adventure. Like there's 5 wormholes, one open, right? Hopefully, everyone should be at this point going, what's through the other 4? But you don't feel like I need to know right now, right? You have, hopefully, what I tried to do was give you this sense of the other 4 aren't opening anytime soon. It was a fluke that one opened. The other 4, maybe they'll get there clearly, and maybe they won't get to all of them, but it's not going to be like today, and you shouldn't feel like anxious waiting for it. So, yeah. Huh. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I should have also like paid attention to usually at the end of a Kindle book, it'll say like the end before it moves on to the extra stuff. Like it'll actually tell you the end. I could have just kept reading to find out that there were more chapters, or looked in the chapter guide to see that there was more chapters, but I was just like I think it was part of sleep deprivation, part just like, oh my God, it can't end here. Part like, what is going to happen next?
Yeah, I will never do a cliffhanger. I will never release a book where you feel like it's not done. That's not going to happen.
No, it definitely had a really great ending, and it wasn't cliffhanger ending, but it was also an ending that was like, okay, now I need to read the rest of the series.
That was the plan.
Right.
That's the plan, right?
But it was also like, I need to read the rest of the series, but it doesn't have to be like right this minute, so I can go and maybe finish some more books off my TBR and then get back to it.
Maybe I should have made a cliffhanger. Maybe I'd have better read through if I ended on a cliffhanger. No,
I'm really bad at reading series straight through because I read so many books, and I find that my brain has an easier time distinguishing between the books if I have breaks. If I read a series straight through, my brain tends to mix up the books and what happens in each book.
See, I do read them all straight through, and I always do mix up what happens in each book. I just don't care. that's how I've always read. But I also feel like I'm offering people a 25-book series. Like I'm offering people a series that I always say I'm kind of kidding about 25, but I'm not. Like I don't know how many it's going to be, but it's going to be a lot of books. So I feel like kind of bad about myself if I was like, I'm going to give you a 20-book series, but so for 10 years you're just not going to be happy. Like you'll read one, it'll end on a cliffhanger, and the next one, it'll another cliffhanger, and then you'll never be satisfied until like 10 years from now. Like, come on, I can't do that to people. That's not fair. So every book will end, and I think all 3 ended. I haven't had anyone complain about. I mean, not everyone liked every ending, but no one felt that it was like incomplete.
No one was sending you crazy messages like I did.
It was really funny. I read it. I'm like, what's the problem? I could not figure it out.
And then by the time you had responded, I was already in bed and finished the book, and I forgot to come back and say like, oh yeah, I read the remainder of the book. So I woke up to your messages like, what are you talking about?
Right.
I'm like, oh crap, I forgot to circle back to that.
Fine. It was just kind of funny.
So that's my Kindle story. So I've learned never trust the Kindle.
Yeah, Usman did. If you remember, did you get a notice saying the book was over like 5 chapters before the end? Because you said you read it on Kindle. So if you're still on, let me know.
Then, curious if it's automatically connects to my Goodreads, and when I hit the end of that chapter, it went and marked red off on my Goodreads, like because I have it set up to automatically do that. But I'm like, the book isn't done yet.
So I don't know what the deal is. I don't know if it's you just had like an aberration with your copy, or if there's something wrong with the file. But no one else has said that. Now I'm wondering how many of my negative reviews are people who missed the last 5 chapters. But no one else has complained about a cliffhanger, so I suspect it's not a universal.
I mean, hopefully people were smarter than me and saw that there was still 5% left and continued on.
Anyway, all right. Any other questions? Come on, hit me.
Yeah. So, who was your favorite and/or easiest character to write?
I don't think in these terms. Probably. I mean, Whaley Rohan is probably the easiest. It's my voice. I mean, he's the whole book is in his voice. It's me, basically. If I were cooler and had less fashion sense. Thank you. That's not cool. Weird. All right, I don't know how to fix that, but I will see what I can do. Whaley is probably pretty easy for me because I just indulge my most sarcastic self and put it on the page. I had a lot of fun with her. And then the hardest are anyone who has a weird dialect. Like I'm sure, like the Ursins, I'm sure their dialect is drifting from book to book when it's not supposed to. No one was anywhere near as hard as in a short story I wrote. I tried to have a character speak in a dialect that was roughly taken from like the way colonized people speak English, like the English you see in like in to a certain extent in Indian movies, but much more in Nollywood, Nigerian movies. The country spans many different groups of people who speak many different tribal languages. The only thing that unites them is English. So their movies are English, but their English is not the same as English spoken in either Britain or in the US. It's different in very interesting ways. And I've only watched a handful of Nollywood movies, enough to notice these linguistic things. So I tried to reproduce that and make a similar derivative language for my short story. Whose name I can't remember. The one that goes with my reader magnet. If you subscribe to my newsletter, which no one should do because it's terrible. The story was called Foreign Powers, and that language was so hard. I don't know if I pulled it off, but it was definitely, it was agony to write. It was so hard. So yeah, Whaley.
Whaley was my favorite character.
Yeah, everyone loves her because she. Everyone likes the person who keeps the main character, keeps him humble.
Yeah.
Everyone loves that person, and someone was like, she's really mean to him. I'm like, she's an empath. She knows if she's hurting him too much, right?
Right.
The idea of I always like the idea of an empath because unlike science fiction shows like in Star Trek or whatever, if you're an empath, you're like super kind and understanding because you can feel everyone's emotions. And I'm always like, I don't know. I think an empath would be just as mean as she could be because. Like, oh, you think you're suffering? Everybody's suffering. You're not special. That person's suffering to that person. I can feel it. I've got this extra sense. You're not special. So get over yourself.
Yeah.
So I imagine Whaley is that kind of empath, and I always thought it was a good idea.
She was that snarky, sarcastic character that said the things that you wish you could say in public.
Yeah.
All of those thoughts that we have in our head, Whaley just throws it out there.
Yeah, no, she's fun. She's fun to write, and it's good to have a character like that, so that when she approves of something Rohan does, he can feel good about himself. Give him little cookies, right? Because people talk about stakes, right? Like I remember this big argument I had with people who write grimdark. Not an argument exactly, but sort of a disagreement. People think, yeah, right. People think like, books don't have stakes if no one dies. And I'm like, there's so much you can lose without dying, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
There's so much you can gain without like defeating your enemy. You gain a little bit of respect in like your friend's eyes. Like that's a win. You don't need to have these huge, defeat the global enemy that's trying to like wipe out, get the ring into the volcano. That doesn't have to happen. You can have smaller victories and smaller losses. You can have stakes that aren't, and you have to, otherwise the ring gets in the volcano and the story's over. If you want to write 25 books, you better have incremental stuff.
Right.
And I also don't like it when everyone's about to die all the time. Like, that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, give me, give me characters who are risking less.
Mhm.
Sometimes.
Well, in some people's worlds, like in Rohan's world, even though he knew there was a much larger world outside of where he lived, that little community he had was his world. And so if he didn't defend that community, he was losing everything.
Yeah.
Everyone was going to die.
Yeah. Well, you'll see. In book 2, he goes back to Earth, and you get to see what his feelings are about that community. So there's a whole bunch.
What was your favorite scene to write?
I don't know. Man, these are hard questions. I don't really think of it. Yeah, part of it is I don't really think of things in the. My favorite scene to write was probably the the fight against the Inquisition.
Mm.
Right? Like, you take him to the dark. It's in a way it's the easiest. Right? It's like, oh yeah, your characters who you've been saying is very tough, right? And then but he's been restraining himself. He's been kind. He's been like, no, I don't want to go and mass murder people. And then you put him in a situation where I hope readers get to there and they're like, yeah, he probably shouldn't be mass murdering, but I kind of get it. I can kind of forgive him because they were mass murdering first, and so he gets to go like completely cut loose and slaughter a bunch of people, and that's very satisfying. I don't know, in a very terrible way, it's kind of satisfying. It's like killing Nazis, in a video game, right? Like, it's like, oh man, you don't really want to just go kill a bunch of people, but if they're Nazis, all right, you
Right.
can feel good
Then
about
it's
it.
okay.
You can feel good about it. I don't know if any Nazis out there watching, I'm not sorry. But so it was a chance to write that kind of scene. And actually, I think about this sometimes. When I originally wrote that scene, in the next scene, he was much more defensive and much less apologetic.
Yeah.
And it took me a couple of rewrites to realize that I couldn't go that way. He had to feel worse about what he had done. He couldn't be like, yeah, I killed a couple thousand people with my bare hands, but so what? He had to sort of be like, oh, I really shouldn't have done that. Like,
yeah.
I can sort of excuse it, but man, I really shouldn't have done that. And that made the character, in a way, that solidified the character for me.
Yeah.
Is fixing that, changing that section, that chapter, after the chapter after, and have him go, oh, all right, being a monster again. I was trying not to do that. And I also don't want him sitting around going, oh my God, I'm terrible, and like drinking himself into a coma and like
Right.
being all like, I'm going to not shower for 3 weeks now. Like, I don't want him to go despondent, because on some level he's also like, yeah, they kind of needed to die. So he's not going to go crazy dark with it. But I had to hit the right middle path where he's like, I really should not have gone as far as I did. All right, take a deep breath. Shouldn't have done that. All right, now tomorrow I'm going to wake up and try to be better. And that to me was a very again, I got it wrong on the first draft. I'm not sure if I got it wrong on the draft that I printed first. I don't remember, but I definitely had to fix that, and that really helped me get the character and get the theme. Was changing that and having him go, oh, I screwed up. And Whaley doesn't care. She's like, yeah, you killed a few thousand people, but that's not against the law on my. I don't have law.
And all these people are alive because of it.
No, he didn't save anyone.
Right. It was justified, but
it might have been justified, but like they killed everyone they were going to kill. They were done. They were ready to go, and he like chased them down and killed them. Yeah. Right? Like it's kind of a war crime.
They were kind of surrendering, but
they were totally surrendering, and they were trying to flee, and then they were surrendering. Like, it's a war crime. Like, people sometimes call this book cozy, and I'm like, there's a little genocide in there. I don't know how cozy that is.
Yeah.
But hopefully, it's sort of understandable genocide. That should be the name of a book. That's a terrible way to say it. But yeah, so it was an interesting.
But then when later on, when he did let someone go, they went and, told the hybrids where he was hiding, who then came after him. So, he tried to learn his lesson, and then
It's always going to be, it's a helix. I take this helix thing very seriously. He's always going to go back and forth. He's going to go too far in one direction. He's going to, be try too hard to be nice, then not try hard enough. And it's always going to be a back, because that's how I think life is. That's how I think more moral growth is. You don't just figure out the right thing to do and then just do it. You're always going to overcorrect and have to come back. And you're always going to try to go back, and you work hard in one direction, then realize you've gone too far, come back in the other direction. And hopefully over time, you're getting somewhere, you're rising, you're going through this helix. Yeah. But I take that whole helix thing very seriously. I always thematically, I always try to tie everything that happens in the series into that model, because I think it's accurate, right? You don't just improve. Yeah, everyone likes, people really, that scene resonated with people much more than I thought it would when Rohan loses it, which he doesn't do in the other books. Yeah. I'm giving spoilers away to, part of me wanted like, oh, he should lose it in every book and kill a whole few thousand people in like around chapter 30. And then I didn't.
So what was the hardest scene to write?
What was the hardest scene to write? The beginning. Beginnings are hard, right? It's always, I read the opening. I still don't love the prologue. I've said this before. I've rewritten it like 50 times, right? Not one word is what was in the original version, but I'm still not really. The problem with the prologue is so some people don't like the structure. That's fine. I'm sorry, you don't like the structure. Like that whole where you start at the end and then you're like 12 days earlier, and then how did we get here? Some people just hate that. I understand why they hate it, but I felt I needed it because I needed to establish the genre and the tone. Right? This is an action story. It's about superheroes. It's not hard science fiction. These guys have magic powers. I need to set that up real fast because if you didn't have a prologue, the next thing is him just like hanging on a space station and then like rescuing some bears. Right? There's no fighting. Right? There's no it's not an action thing. There's no tension. So I needed to get that up in front, that this is the kind of story you're in for. But I never really felt like it was good. And I rewrote it like so many times, the prologue. I'm never really happy with it. And it's bad, right? When you write a book and you're an unknown and your first few pages aren't great, it's really hard to hook readers. Luckily, a lot of people have read it, but it's tricky. I just couldn't pull. I don't know how I could. There are things in the book that I feel like I could change for the better, and I know how now. But that one I don't. I don't know how I could make that more compelling than it was. But yeah, that was hard.
Well, you got us with it, so.
I mean, people read. I got a lot of readers. One way, part of it is it's different if you're trying to sell someone. They just see your Amazon ad and they just click on the, read the first few pages, and then you get people like, you get a whole community of people who have like done like reviews and says, oh, you got to try this. If you heard from someone you trust, you got to try this, and you bought the book, you're not going to quit after a page.
Right.
You're going to give it some more time, and hopefully by the time people get, I don't know. I do feel like, generally speaking, like the second half of the book is more compelling than the first. When I read it, I'm more drawn in then. But I also feel like I don't know how I could make that much better, because I have to set things up.
Yeah.
And the same reason I think Blood Reunion, many people say that's the best book, because I've had 2 books to set things up, right? You right. know things, right? There are payoffs in Blood Reunion that you can't have if there weren't already 2 books. So it's not so simple as why couldn't the first book be as good? It's like
there's a reason why a lot of the first books in the series aren't the best books in the series.
Almost never, right? Unless like the author blows their ideas, and then they're just
right. Like, that's their high point right there. Which I mean, to me as a reader, that would be sad. Like, if the best book is the first book in the series, why read the rest of the series?
As a writer, I really want to have 12 books out and have people talking about the set. You know what I mean? Like, I'd love to be at that point in the future where there are 10 or 12 books out and people are like, 7 was my favorite, because people talk, the way people talk about Dresden,
yeah.
It changes. You got to wait and I have a feeling, I have a sense of some of the things they're going to say, but I hope people understand. Like, a lot of people don't like Return of the Griffin as much, and I understand why they don't. But I also hope that when book 10 comes out or book 15 comes out, people are like, I get what he was trying to do there.
Right.
And it may not have been my favorite book, but I see why it was there. Like,
it was important for the series.
Yeah. I hope they rehabilitate it. I mean, a lot of people like that book, but most people don't like it as much. It's your third favorite. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. So I don't know. I'm curious. Like, I mean, I have to write them. That's part of the thing that motivates me, right? I'm like, I'm writing book 4, and I'm like, I can't write book 5 until book 4 is done. And I can't have that experience of hearing what someone says about the first 10 until the next 5 are done and out. So I have to
We
get this.
can't have you pull a George R. R. Martin and just quit. You have to finish the series.
I will. I 100% guarantee it, unless I get hit by a bus or something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record a secret video of like how it ends. And then if I die, my wife will release it to the internet. So everyone can find out the story if I get hit by a bus or something. A secret video.
So this is a great segue into talking about future writing projects so what's next for the Hybrid Helix? We've got 3 books. You're working on book 4. You said you don't know exactly how long the series, but do you have an idea of at least where you want to go with this series?
I know how it ends. I know what I want it to end. I know, roughly speaking, like what kinds of things I want Rohan to. So he's got a certain attitude. He's got a certain moral stance. He's got certain beliefs about what he should and shouldn't be doing. I know how I want that to change. I know where I want it to end up. I know what I want him to accomplish. Right? But that's very vague. I could write all that out in like a page. And then I have loose ideas of how to get there, partially because I feel like I could spend like 6 months and really try to pin it down. But then it's still going to take me 10 years to write. So like, what happens if I get a good idea 5 years from now? You know, like it doesn't make sense to really make a detailed outline today. Because that's just like me wasting a lot of time on a deadline. I might think of cool stuff in the next 10 years that'll fill in details.
Yeah.
So I don't know. People don't know. Oh, I'm an architect. Oh, I'm a gardener. I don't know. I'm somewhere in between. When I write a book, I need to know how the book ends, and I need to know the structure very, very, very closely. But the details I come up with as I write. Right. So yeah. So I definitely plan to write, something like 15 to 25 books. Just practicality. It can't be much more than that. It can't be 75. I can't write like 6 books a year. I just the quality. I'm not good enough to write at the quality I want to write at and release every 2 months. It's not even remotely possible. I think I can write 2 books a year. So I have side projects. You read one, Partial Function, my fantasy novel that's coming out. That's meant to be a standalone. You read that. That didn't feel like the start of a series the same way Wistful Ascending felt like the start of a series. There are sequel potential in there. People really like it. I'm not saying I wouldn't write more books, but I don't have a plan. Yeah. The same way.
It could definitely stand on its own, but it could be part of something bigger too.
It was definitely meant to stand on its own. I wrap up that book. That book ends, right? Yeah. You know all the secrets. They're revealed, right? And I really like that book. I was really happy with it. But if I don't write a sequel to that book, I'll be comfortable. And I as an author, I'm comfortable saying to readers, read this book. It's good. That's it.
I can't wait for the world to read it because
thank you.
That was my introduction to your reading.
You're the
which
only
was a strange way to come about it, but
you're the only person who read Partial Function before any of my other books.
I read that and I was like, oh my God. I know they're totally different books, but that got me excited to read Wistful Ascending even more. Because I'm like, okay, I'm reading this and I'm obsessed. And I'm like, one of a handful of people in the world that have read this. I beta read it before the arcs even were ready. And I'm like,
one of the first 10 or 15, something like that. Absolutely.
I don't even remember how it came about, but I'm like, yeah, sign me up. I haven't read any of your writing, but sign me up.
I was really happy with that book, but again, I really felt like if that book if that book ends there, I'm good. Like like that told a story that I was really comfortable with. And again, if that was really popular and I think I can make a lot of money or, it's partially money, but it's partially eyeballs. Yeah. Like, my dream is to have enough people. Dreams have levels, right? I really like to sell enough of these books to pay for what I put in, right? I like to break even where I don't feel like I'm not just taking money out of my retirement accounts to buy these covers, I'd like to break even and get audio done for the other 2, which I don't have. because that's just a big chunk of change that I can't afford right now. But I would like Partial Function to do well and hook some people who are, because I have felt like there were a lot of fantasy readers who are like, I don't really want to read a superhero science fiction thing. I think they hear superhero space opera and I think a lot of people feel like it's a goofy sounding idea.
Yeah.
So they don't want to read it. I don't really know. I didn't think that when I wrote it, but that seems to be the reaction I get. So I'm hoping Partial Function hooks some people like, I want to read an Asian inspired high fantasy.
It was really good.
Thank you.
I can't wait for everyone else to read it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And I'll read it again when it comes out.
Yeah, Sarah Springs is doing the cover for that. Sarah Ferrari. Her real name is Sarah Ferrari. She's on like Twitter as Sarah Springs. She did the cover for Phased, Tori Duffy's book. Yep. She's done some other things. She did some interior art for Tiago Abdallah. So she's doing the cover. And I need to get. I have all the kinds of scheduling problems you don't care about. That not finish Partial. I had to do another rewrite of Partial. Like get the end sorted a little better. Add some stuff to Partial Function before I can get it to an editor. And as soon as all that's done, I'll publish it and hopefully get it in SPIFFO 10 because I think it has I would like to put a book in SPIFFO because I lost SPIFFO 8. I got eliminated early and I felt really bad about it. So I was like, I'm gonna write a book that'll get further, an actual fantasy book. So we'll see.
I think it has a good shot, not knowing who it's going up against, but based off of what I have read, I would vote for it. So.
Thank you. I mean,
I'm one of 10 people, but I would read it.
1 of 10.
So those are all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you still want to talk about?
No. There's all kinds of stuff. I will be making a spoiler full video of Wistful Ascending, a recap video that I'm going to probably release soon. Because I want a video on my YouTube channel where someone who has read it but has taken some time off and they don't want to reread it to get into Return of the Griffin, but they may have forgotten details. I'm just kind of a video where you just watch the video and get that recap. But I don't want to put it in the other books because then I don't want to like the first 15 pages to be like, what you read already, you're paying for that. You're paying for that paper. So, no, thank you so much for having me on and for giving the book a chance. I'm always thrilled when people give my books a chance and read them.
I knew when Leslie loved it that I was going to love it too because we have very similar reading tastes. And so whenever Leslie loves a book, it immediately goes onto my TBR at some point.
I'm trying to remember why Leslie read it. I knew this at one point. There was some chain of events, someone recommended it and she decided, well, if this person liked it enough. It all started with Miggins. I keep saying, I told you this story. I told everyone this story. I was like a nobody, right? No one knew who I was. I sold the book to my friends and family. And then I entered SPIFFO 8 and then I went on Twitter and this guy, Miggins, he has a channel and he does book reviews. And he's like, oh, I'll take an ARC, or it wasn't an ARC anymore, right? It was like, I'll take a copy to read. I was like, oh, thank you so much. And then Jordan Buxton, who was a friend of his, said, well, if he took one, I'll take one too. And I'm like, all right. And what was funny is Miggins didn't read it for like 8 months, but Jordan read it. But because Miggins said yes, Jordan took it. And then Jordan Buxton read it, and he got Andrew over Andrew's Wizardly Reads to read it. He did a video review of it. And I think Jordan also did on his blog. But, Andrew's got some reach. And then a bunch of people, it spiraled from there. So it was really, it's been really amazing for me because, I have these people, reading the book and then they give feedback and different parts resonate with people. I don't know. Yeah. It's fun.
Well, I don't have quite the reach that Andrew does, but I hope that if there's anyone out there that watches this back, we've convinced you to pick it up. Even if you've made it to the end and got all the spoilers, it's still well worth the read of reading Wistful Ascending.
Thank you so much.
So thank you again, Joe, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone out there who was with us during this and who's watching this back. Next month in June, we'll have James Lloyd Dellin on and Michael Roberti. I'm really excited for their books.
Nice.
I'll be doing something different from Michael's books where he just released a prequel to his book 1, and he was interested to see the reception of people who read the prequel first before book 1. And I'm like, well, I haven't read book 1 yet, so if you really want the opinions on that, I'm happy to slide the prequel in first. So we'll have those 2 authors on next month in June. Thank you again, Joe, for joining me today. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you very much, Kate.
And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.